is Barbara Stripling. Many of you know her or know of her. She's the only person that I know who has a model, the Stripling model, named for her. And that's, I think, quite a significant achievement today. She has just ended a year of service as president of the 60,000 member American Library Association. And during that year, took an amazing amount of opportunity, flying literally around the world to advocate, to articulately present the argument for improved libraries and improved education, and in a very knowledgeable and thoughtful way to be sure that the challenge of us having capable people serving in our schools and our libraries is a challenge that everyone, including those who control the money, understood and understand. Barbara Stripling today serves at the iSchool at Syracuse University. She previously distinguished herself and our state as director of the New York City Department of Education school library system in New York City. It gives me great, great pleasure this morning to introduce you to Barbara Stripling.
Good morning. I'm so glad to be here. You could not have picked a topic that I am more excited about. Inquiry is my passion, my heart, and the blending with the Common Core is magical. So I hope I can set us off in a good way. I wanted to start with something very philosophical. This is where I started as an educator. And you have to understand, well, not as an educator, I was a classroom teacher first, but it's where I started as a librarian. What I noticed after being in the library for not too long was that I had students who came into the library and they had to do a research project. And so they picked something that they already knew about, the brown bear, because why would they want to spend any effort learning anything? And so then they would go to the general encyclopedias and they would pull off the B volume, but it was B for brown, not for bear. And they would fumble around, and after a little while they would find the brown bear. And then they would proceed to do their work, and they would copy. The brown bear is brown. Okay, so I decided that my whole life would be dedicated to helping students learn how to think. I had to overcome this brown bear is brown syndrome, and it affects all of our kids if we let them or design instruction that makes it easy for them to copy and to not think. Well, we can handle that. We can engage them in learning, and we can actually figure out the what, the solution to the brown bear is brown syndrome. We can empower our kids to think of ideas on their own, to pursue their own learning, and to be college and career ready. So what are our learning goals? Well, certainly we are interested in engagement, and that's kind of a bottom line. That if kids aren't engaged, they're not going to dedicate themselves to learning. So that's at our core. We know that has to be there. We also know that it's essential that our students understand content. What are we there for? We've got some wonderful knowledge of the world, and our students need to dig deeply and understand it so we can make that happen. But the other piece, and a piece that we often forget, is that empowering piece of teaching our students the skills of independent learning. That's the magical piece that we often forget. And that, if you know the Common Core, is the real secret to the success of the Common Core. So let's look at what teaching looks like in order to get to this engagement, this depth of content learning, and the skills of independent learning. We know that there is a method of teaching and learning called constructivism that leads directly to inquiry and to this type of deep learning. So what does constructivism do? I still remember the first time when I became familiar with the idea of constructivism, and I actually had been a teacher for a librarian for a number of years, and I read about this new thing called constructivism, and it meant that I had to design instruction so kids were doing their own learning. They were constructing their own conclusions and drawing their own opinions, and I'm going, okay, that's what I want. I want my students to think. That's my driving passion. So the first day that I tried it, some of you all may have heard this because it's burned in my soul. I gave the students some instruction in the library, and I was in Fayetteville, Arkansas. It was a huge library, and a lot of corners, niches, you know about those. And so I gave them instruction, you know, just kind of laid out the framework, because I was going to be a constructivist teacher, and they were going to come to their own conclusions. And so I said, okay, go do it. And they were gone. I mean, they didn't leave the library, but they were everywhere. I couldn't even find them. They were stuck off everywhere. Honestly, now, when I look back, I'm sure they were working. I know they were, because they weren't making any noise. They weren't congregating. They were applying themselves. But I lasted 10 minutes, max. And then I went, okay, come back, come back. Let me tell you what I want you to learn. Yeah, it took a little while to get comfortable with the idea of constructivism, where they are constructing their own meaning. They're building new understandings based on what they already know, their prior knowledge. They're connecting ideas themselves. They're able to talk to each other, have a social environment, interact, exchange ideas, build on the ideas of their fellow students, and they are able to engage in authentic tasks. And we're going to talk a little bit about authentic tasks today. Bernie already alluded to it, actually, that the real power of learning is being able to apply it to the real world. And you're going to have a panel on that later on, either today or tomorrow, where people in the real world are going to talk about the application of inquiry and thinking skills. So constructivism, yes, we can do this. I promise you, we can do this. Many of you probably came out of your education knowing how to do it. I had to learn how to do it. So let's look then at how this all fits with inquiry learning. And let me talk to you just a bit about the characteristics of inquiry learning. First of all, inquiry learning is intellectually active. And that means that students are making their own decisions. They're figuring out the content that they need to answer their questions. They're engaging with texts and ideas, and their brain is active. They also are, inquiry is question-based. And I think if you ask anybody, what is inquiry, they're going to say, oh, it's questions. I mean, that's the normal thing. But you know what? We don't give students permission to ask their own questions. Well, how can this fit with that? And I'm just going, yes, you've got it. I don't even care if you find the answer. You're asking the right question. Inquiry learning is personalized. We know that students are engaged when they find that personal connection, when they find a connection to the real world. And we're all used to the teenagers saying, so what? So what does it mean to me? Why do I have to learn this? Well, if we design instruction in an inquiry-based way, they're going to see that connection. They're absolutely going to be able to make the personal connection. It is certainly authentic, and now this is really going to date me, but one day in the library, I had a group of students in there, and they were working on the Renaissance. They didn't know from diddly squat about the Renaissance, but they were working away on different artists in the Renaissance, and all of a sudden I heard this young man say, "Oh, that's where the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles came from." I went, okay, it's authentic. If that works for you, it works for me. Inquiry is also open-ended. In other words, we can change the question of the students from, well, what's the right answer? Just tell me the right answer. I'm a good student. You tell me the right answer. I'll give it back to you, I promise. And we've trained them to do that. To the situation where there's not just one right answer, where they have to pursue it and they have to decide when they have found the best evidence and the right answer for the situation that they are facing. Inquiry is also both divergent and convergent. Students are expected to ask why and what for and push against and what else, and push for the gaps as well as for what they see. I still remember one inquiry situation where I was working with a group of students, and one student said, "I never thought I would understand the point of view of both the slaves and the slave owners." That's pretty powerful when they can think in both directions and understand it. And finally, inquiry is transformative. I certainly believe that, and I think all of you all believe that as well. That's why we're here. There is some powerful research about mental models, and we know that we have mental models. We don't always identify them, and that's part of our problem. But when we can learn something and recognize that our mental model is not correct, it's not the right model, and change that mental model, that's real learning. When I was growing up, I thought that trees caused wind. I can still remember thinking that. Now that's very logical. That was a mental model based on the world that I saw, and every time the wind blew, the trees flowed in the wind, so automatically trees cause wind. And I can almost remember the time, but I remember it was in elementary school when I finally went, no. The wind is causing the trees to blow. It's not the other way around. Oh, okay, wrong mental model. I didn't have those words, but that's what we want kids to be able to do, to go, okay, I thought this, I can identify what I did believe, but now I see and have a different idea. That's what inquiry does for our kids. It teaches students to build real understanding from information. Now, I have a theory here, and I'm going to tell you all, and I'm sure it's right. So, I know that we've got too much information in the world, and we all spend a lot of time gathering information. And if education is only about information, we're going to end up with a bunch of junk and no sense and no ideas. So we've got to do something with all this information. And what we do is we take it within ourselves and we figure out how it connects to what we already know, maybe some patterns that we see, we can draw some conclusions and build ideas. Then it becomes knowledge. And I personally think knowledge doesn't exist outside of ourselves, that knowledge is something that is within us. It doesn't sit on a shelf. Information sits on the shelf. When we put it within our own brains, it becomes knowledge. But I think we have another step, and that's what inquiry does for us. It takes that knowledge, and if we really understand it, we're able to apply it in a new situation. If students really understand the Civil War in America, they're going to have much more understanding of civil wars in other places. That's what we're aiming for, is to go all the way from information to understanding. So let's look then at the convergence of the Common Core and inquiry. And I was so excited when the Common Core came out, and I started looking at it and I went, yes, this is what I'm talking about. These are the skills that are going to lift our students from information to understanding. It actually, the Common Core just throws open the door to inquiry. And we should be doing it in every single one of our classes. So what are the common elements there? Well, both require constructivist teaching. Both expect students to read text with deep understanding, drawing their own conclusions. They have to be thinking while they're reading, while they're gathering information. Both are predicated on deep level thinking, not just gathering a bunch of bits, but actually understanding the content and building deep understanding based on their thinking skills that they're learning. Both require application of learning strategies, and you can see those built into the Common Core. It's not only thinking skills, but there are also strategies that we can be teaching as we're teaching the Common Core. And the thing that is so powerful is that it requires continuous development. So we can build on what happened before, and we can know what is expected to have happened before. And we don't have to start every year where kids say, oh, I never heard of that. You have to go back. Yes, you have. I know you have. We're going to build on it. And my expectations are going to be the next level higher. That's very powerful. We're going to build the skill of our students. And we know that if we do this, it's going to lead to success in college and career, and that's really what we want. We want them to be independently successful. So, I'm going to give you a little test. Think about when you, if you have, ever bought a car or some other big purchase where you actually had to do a little bit of thinking about what are you going to get, what is your process. So just briefly, think about what is the process that you followed when you were buying a new car. What'd you start with? Well, when I was looking for a car, now I lived in New York City for 9 years and I didn't have a car. So when I moved up to Syracuse, all of a sudden I had to buy a car, and I'm this older person who hasn't bought a car in however many years. And so I had to figure out the process. And the first thing I needed to do was to gather up my background knowledge. What do I know about cars? What do I know about Syracuse? Snow. Okay, that's going to put it in a whole different realm from what I'm used to. The second thing was I had to ask questions. I had to figure it out. And I'm assuming you all did the same thing. I never learned how to gather information based on a matrix until I bought my first car. I was an adult. Nobody ever told me that sense of inquiry until I was an adult and figured it out. Of course, what I found out when I bought a car when I was in Arkansas was that I went through the whole process and then I bought it by color. But, okay, but it was on my chart. I had followed the process. So I hope that you all have a natural sense of your own inquiry process as a learning process. And indeed, it is gathering information, but then it's making sense of it. As Bernie said, I do have a model, Stripling model of inquiry. So let me talk to you just briefly about what that model is, and I think you'll find it useful, actually, if you don't have a model already. The first phase is actually connect, and that's where you figure out, what do I already know about this? What background knowledge do I need to gather? I have to fit it into some kind of context, or I'm not going to be able to connect it to anything. When I gather that background knowledge and think about what I already know, I should be able to generate some good questions. much beyond the what questions. I should be able to generate some why, some how, some what if, some various types of questions, and that's the wonder phase. And that's a delightful phase if we empower kids to be asking the questions. The next phase is obviously investigate, and that's what we think of as inquiry, where, oh, we're just finding the answers. But really, investigate involves a whole bunch of thinking skills that you're going to find in the Common Core. It involves evaluating the information, analyzing it, fitting it into patterns, drawing conclusions, comparing. All of those types of thinking skills are involved in the investigate phase. Now the next phase, and anybody from New York City? The next phase is my favorite phase of inquiry, which is hilarious to everybody in New York City. But my favorite phase is construct. And the reason that it is so important is it's the one we usually skip. Usually, kids go right from investigate to express. They find stuff, they plop it over here. Boom, boom. Never goes through their head. Construct means it has to go through their head because they are constructing their own conclusions. They are thinking, and they're figuring out what this means and what they want to present about it and what connects to them. And then, yes, indeed, they need to express it. And finally, the last phase is one that often gets skipped, and that's reflect, where they think back, what did I actually learn? And what new questions do I have? Because inquiry is not a dead end. It should lead our kids to say, ooh, that was interesting. Now I want to find out about this and ask more questions, which is why this whole thing is a cycle and not a linear process. So how does the Common Core lead to inquiry-based teaching and learning? Well, I thought I'd just give us three, I think, examples. The first one is from the reading standards, but it has embedded in it a number of phases of inquiry in this one standard. So give me some thinking skill that you see in that standard, and let's figure out what phase it is. Interpretations. Where would you be making interpretations?
Investigating and constructing.
Yeah, probably between investigating and constructing, but absolutely. You do it partly while you're gathering the information and partly while you're drawing your conclusions. This is also based on questions. You're answering questions. So there may be some wonder in here where they're starting with the questions that they ask. Recognizing cause and effect, that's probably investigation. Answering questions, finding the answers is probably investigation.
Giving opinions is probably construction.
Yes, giving opinions, probably that's construct. So you can see it's kind of this side, but inquiry is not this, okay, you're through, you're never going back. You saw from the diagram, you go back and forth. And maybe you find an answer that causes you to ask a new question. And so that's actually the beauty of inquiry. It's messy. It makes you a little uncomfortable. Okay, this one is more clean cut. Where do you think we distinguish fact, opinion, and reason judgment? What phase? Could be investigate. That'd be probably what I would think. Because you're forming your own facts and opinions when you get to construct. But here you're identifying the difference between facts and opinions as you're gathering the information. And this one is speaking and listening standards. And so it's talking about presenting through digital media. Well, obviously that's express. It's going to call on all these skills that you've learned previously, but expressing is your understanding of findings, reasoning, and evidence. And so where is that understanding being cemented? In construct. And the evidence is being gathered and investigated. So each step builds on the other. You can't skip any step really, but you can scaffold for missing steps. So they don't necessarily have to find all of their information during Investigate. If you don't have time, you can hand them the best articles or the best resources rather than spending time on that, so they can spend their time on thinking about what they're finding. What I hope you concluded from that is that Common Core standards are indeed standards, and each standard has embedded within it a number of skills. It is overwhelming. I don't know if you all feel that, but I certainly did when I thought that with one unit I would do analyze how a text makes connections among distinct. That is way too much to do in one single unit, because look at the skills that are contained in there. Well, we recognize this in New York City, and a group of us got together and decided, all right, we value the Common Core, so let's look at the embedded skills within these standards. Because, eureka, those are the skills that school librarians teach, and that we need to be teaching in all of our classrooms. So you have to be able to recognize your own point of view before you can determine someone else's point of view, or determine how your point of view actually impacts your interpretation of the information. You have to recognize the effect of different perspectives and points of view on information. We don't do that with kids. We present everything as though that's the right approach. And certainly we're all getting away from textbooks now, and we're using real, authentic literature, pieces of literature, which is enabling us then to get at these different points of view. So what you have is a resource now called the Empire State Information Fluency Continuum. It should be in every one of your schools, in your school library, and your school librarian should be your best collaborator on this. This is a K through 12 breakdown of the skills that are aligned with the Common Core and also aligned with the Stripling model of inquiry. So you're going to find the skills there. You don't have to do all of this work. We've already done it for you, and it's in every school library system, and I hope every school library in the state. So you've got that resource right at your fingertips. And there's a lot else in that booklet. You're going to find some graphic assessment tools that enable you to see whether students are actually learning the skills. But lots of other things are going to be available there. But what you need to know today, as we're looking at the alignment between Common Core and inquiry, is that alignment is largely done for you. And the breakdown of the standards into the individual skills. So I recommend this as a resource. And it's also available online, probably through every BOCES, school library system.